to undermine the probe. Let's bring in former South Florida U.S. Attorney Kendall Coffey and former George W. Bush political director Matt Schlapp. And I want to direct you to just one more piece of sound. Gentlemen, thank you for being here before we begin the discussion, which is from Sekulow, saying the exact opposite of what you just heard him say to Jake. Listen to this.
But you don't know that he isn't under investigation now, do you?
Well, no one's notified us that he is, so I can't read people's minds, but I can tell you this. We have not been notified that there's an investigation of the President of the United States. So that nothing has changed in that regard since James Comey's testimony.
Now, that's a different non-issue because there's no mystery. If they want to know whether or not the President is being looked at by Mueller for anything, they could just pick up the phone. Clearly, this White House doesn't have any problem meddling. But he said to Chris Wallace that he is being investigated. He said it more than once. What do you make of all of this, whether or not he's being investigated? Legit issue?
Well, it's a fair issue because if we're all Americans and we care about our presidency, the fact that the President of the United States is actually being investigated, that's a very, very serious thing. But I think we're at the point now where, sadly or not, we have to accept that in some form or another, there's an inquiry going on. And that part of that inquiry, call it a matter, call it an inquiry, call it an investigation, is whether something done by the President of the United States could be seen as an act of obstruction. That's our reality, and we can't spin away from it.
Why isn't it as simple as that, Matt? Why all this twisting by Sekulow, by the President? Why play this game?
Well, I think the frustrating part of all this is that the leaks keep happening. And after this story was knocked down that the President was being investigated by the FBI, there was a new leak saying that he was now being investigated by the special counsel. And I think, Chris, the problem here is the definition of terms. I think it all gets fuzzy. The question is this. The President, when I come on your show, I've said it for now months, Team Trump is being looked at for collusion with the Russians. So there's no question that Donald Trump and everybody around him is going to be part of what Kendall just talked about, this matter, this investigation, trying to figure out if there's anything to this. It's a very different thing to say that he is the target of the investigation.
But nobody's saying
that he's the focus. Well, what is that, Chris? It all goes back to this leak. And I think what I encourage CNN to do, I think the Washington Post is a perfectly legitimate source to go to, but run it down yourselves. Who is this leak? Look, what are they saying? Because it all gets fuzzy from that point forward.
I get it, but Matt, I mean, let's call a spade here. The idea that you're upset about leaks only is when the leaks are against you. You weren't talking about leaks when they were coming out about Hillary Clinton's emails. Why make this about leaks? It's such a bogus premise.
You want to run the
either the information is good or it isn't good. That's always the standard. This
Chris,
isn't about
right.
leaks. This is about the substance of the matter.
That's right. So that's right. And I was against those leaks, too. I said it on your show dozens of times. But I think the fact is this. Let's find out what this information is. You guys are trying to figure out why the President tweeted as he tweeted. And it all goes back to this question about whether or not, once again, these investigators, different investigators, this time, have leaked the fact that the President is being investigated.
I don't think that's an issue at all. I mean, you want your situational integrity. No White House I've ever been involved with gave information the way this one does. If you want to worry about leaks, maybe you should start there. But
I agree.
I don't understand how you can equate Comey telling the President that he wasn't the subject or whatever language he used about the investigation to what Mueller might be doing. Comey could not logically have been looking at his own ouster, right, because it hadn't happened yet. So what does that have to do with whether Mueller is looking at this situation, which Comey said on the stand he is sure he is, which makes perfect sense that he would be?
Well, if that's aimed at me, I would just say it's the same. We're reliving the same nightmare, which is investigators working for Jim Comey leaked that the President was being investigated. Jim Comey had to personally knock that down with the President 3 times. Then everybody reported he's not being investigated. Then there's a brand new leak, and now they're saying the President is being investigated. Jay Sekulow is right to say, hey, why don't you just tell us?
Well, first of all, Jay could pick up the phone and he could know as counsel for the President. So the idea that it's a mystery or that unless he's told, which is very unusual, by the investigators themselves, he can't know, that is a specious premise. But, Kendall,
it's not.
Of course it's a specious, but Kendall, let me bring you in on this discussion. The idea that, well, you know, Comey said that he wasn't being investigated, but there were leaks that said he was. Do you see that as something that sheds doubt on whether or not it is knowable that Mueller would be looking at the firing of Comey? Does that mean anything to you?
Well, in an odd way, the Comey era is almost old news. We have a new investigation now. And Mueller is looking at everything.
Right.
And there's no reason to believe that the president is excluded from this broad examination.
So the idea that it was leaked, does that matter to you? Does that change your perception of whether or not Mueller would be looking at the circumstances surrounding Comey's firing? Or do you think that that's a matter of fact?
The leaks are, in many ways, irrelevant. They're disquieting, they're disturbing. Nobody on the law enforcement side likes them either. But what we have now is a serious investigation where the president needs to listen to lawyers and act like somebody who's dealing with a serious legal matter. I mean, Trump being Trump may have gotten him elected, but Trump being Trump in the midst of a serious investigation could get him in a lot of trouble.
I mean, Matt, the reason I'm coming after you about the leak thing is that it just smacks of a partisan spin. I mean, you know, if you're worried about the integrity of the investigation on that level, there shouldn't be leaks. Okay, fair point. But are you worried about the President of the United States trying to undercut the legitimacy of a functioning process of our democracy, which is this inquiry? Doesn't that bother you as an integrity issue as well?
Look, I have said a bunch of times that I think the president ought to comply with the investigation. We ought to bring it to a close. If they can't find collusion with the Russians, I don't think there's much political consequences here. So I agree. I think go along with the investigation, comply with it. I just think the frustration is it's nice to know what's true and what isn't true. And I can see why people who are involved in these things get frustrated when they have to read about it in the paper instead of through their attorneys.
Matt Schlapp, appreciate